Greetings and welcome to the Cerebral Women Art Talks podcast. I'm Phyllis Hollis, your host. As an extension of my Instagram page, Cerebral Women, this podcast offers insights into the visual art world. I interview artists, mainly artists of color and female artists, who will freely articulate what inspires their creativity. In addition, you'll hear interesting perspectives from dedicated art professionals who work with artists and the art institutions that feature them. I'm confident that collectively, these individuals will indeed stimulate your mind as they do our eyes. Please know, these interviews are conducted in my Manhattan apartment, so please forgive the background sounds of city life. Welcome to the Cerebral Women Art Talks podcast. This episode features Lina Iris Viktor, a Liberian, British multidisciplinary artist who lives and works in Italy. Her practice encompasses paintings, sculptures, performances, photography, and water gilding with 24 karat gold. Influences by architecture, archaeology, West African sculptural traditions, ancient Egyptian iconography, classical astronomy, and European portraiture produce a charged materiality that address philosophical ideas of the finite and the infinite, the microcosm and macrocosm, evanescence and eternity. Lina received her BA in film at Sarah Lawrence College and studied photography at the School of Visual Arts in New York. Her solo exhibitions include Sir John Soane's Museum in London, Fotografiska Museum of Photography in Stockholm and Tallinn, Autograph in London, the New Orleans Museum of Art, amongst others. Her group exhibitions include the Museum of the African Diaspora in San Francisco, California, Hayward Gallery in London, North Carolina Museum of Art in Raleigh, North Carolina, Somerset House in London, the Ford Foundation in New York, to name a few. Please visit cerebralwomen.com for her expanded bio and enjoy this episode featuring Lina Iris Viktor. Lina, welcome to my podcast. I'm looking forward to your answers.
I'm looking forward to your questions, Phyllis. I can't wait to, dig deeper than our first conversation we had.
So let's start with, when did you discover your artistic passion?
I've always been creative. That's always been my bent. I mean, from the time I was very young, but I was focused from middle school, high school. I went to school in the UK and I did a lot of theater studies and I did a lot of performing, a lot of plays, a lot of musicals. So I thought my creative path in life would take me to the stage or to film or something, acting. That was obviously I love dance as well. So, more performative arts. And I did that until I was about 17, 18. I came to the States for college and thought that I was going to pursue that, which I did for the first year and had somewhat of a rude awakening. The cultural landscape in the States is very different from the UK. The racial conversations, especially at that time, were very different from the UK. And I felt very constricted in the performative space in terms of what people expected a Black woman to be cast in and all of these things. And so I made a kind of 180 turn and went to film. And I actually majored in film, narrative filmmaking, documentary filmmaking, and screenwriting. And I went on to work for a somewhat famous Black director who I will not name at this point. And had, again, kind of a rude awakening in terms of the fact that there's always the industry side of things, and I just didn't really particularly take to that. And so I went on a different venture and I started to study photography and design. And that kind of segue, I think, with an invitation from a dear friend who was a curator to make work for an exhibition. They were in a new gallery. They were opening the Lower East Side in New York. And I did that. It was very kind of experimental. It was not my safe space, if you will. I just kind of did whatever, had not really a sense of what I was making or why I was making it at the time. But it definitely did kind of open up a new muscle for me in terms of, wow, I can actually just make things I want to make. And I had that kind of lingua franca kind of already there that kind of has flown through all of my work up until now. So I think it was more just a process. I can't really tell you a particular point. In terms of like being a visual artist, I'd say that began about a decade ago. Around 2013 is when I first kind of made my first foray into the visual arts. And it's been full steam ahead since then.
During that time, 2013, what artists were you studying or focusing on as you were discovering your creativity?
Really, honestly, I didn't have any art school training. I didn't come from a visual arts background. I didn't go to school for visual arts, especially not painting and sculpture and so on and so forth. So my discovery of artists came as I started to make and started to be introduced to different people, and they would kind of show me this person's work and that person's work. And I started to kind of get a sense of what I like to see visually. I mean, obviously, I grew up in London. I went to museums all the time. I think one of the most impactful, I guess, art experiences I had at an early age was Rebecca Horn's suspended piano. I saw it at the Tate when I was very young. And it's a piano that kind of deconstructs itself and then comes back together again over the course of, I don't know, like 30 minutes or so. And that was a very, obviously, I remember it to this day, very impactful piece of work. And I obviously began to love her artwork. So looking back at her work, I started looking obviously at a lot of African American artists. I really began to love Kara Walker's work. I started looking at Julie Meritu's work. I started looking at Chris O'Feely's work. And obviously since then I obviously know a lot more artists and look at a lot more artists' work. But at the time I would say when I first started making work, I wasn't looking to other artists in the traditional sense or being inspired by other artists.
How do you define your practice?
I would say I was more of a conceptual artist because for me, it was very much driven by ideas. Like I was making things based on ideas, pretty large and grandiose ideas that I kind of wanted to bring down to earth and have a conversation with people about kind of more macrocosmic ideas. And, I think that I fluctuate. So I think that I've done bodies of work that are far more narrative driven, like those series I did at Hayward Gallery Deferred, all about America's hand in the founding of Liberia. That obviously was very much more about archival information and digging into the history of Liberia and kind of creating a pictorial landscape around that story from my perspective, obviously. And so I think, my different bodies of work kind of play within both fields of being far more, I guess, story-based or narrative-based or trying to depict something. And then also just being very kind of a little bit more like open-ended and conceptual in nature. I would say like my Constellation series is much more conceptual in nature. It's not about a particular thing or about a particular story. It kind of traverses locales and cultures and time in many ways, the kind of things I'm unearthing with those works and the kind of symbologies that I'm pulling from. So I do think that there's kind of this kind of vast latitude in kind of my mover up to date. And I would say, I'm interested in placing myself in situations or even creatively that are uncomfortable and pushing myself. So I've gotten obviously more into sculptures and I've started playing with different materialities in my work and things like playing with textiles. And so I don't really think there's a defined way to contextualize it. I think it's more about exploration in the truest sense.
What do you enjoy most about your practice?
There's a moment that happens when I'm creating because I really do conceive of my works in my head very much. And I spend a long time looking at things and researching things before I ever make anything tangible or physical. And that particular period is pretty agitating because I don't like to work without boundaries in my work. And when you can pick anything and do everything and like a magpie attracted to this, attracted to that, it's very hard to clarify in my head what I'm trying to do. And then I start to synthesize. I get to this point where finally I can start to figure out the compositions of the works. And I know what I want to make and I see something very clearly. And then the thing that I enjoy the most is when I no longer have to think. So when the composition is already kind of in my head and I've mapped it out, and I can just start kind of painting in and filling in and doing all the more kind of laborious handwork and relief building and all this on the substrate, whatever I'm using, paper, canvas. And I can actually zone out because now I know what I'm making. That to me is like the moment when I truly enjoy making art.
And when do you know a work is finished?
I think in a way, I know a work is finished before I've even started it because, like I said, my work's very dense in terms of its compositions. And so I really do map compositions very accurately before I start. And that process can take a very long period of time. So in many ways, I already know the end before I start the actual physical work. Now, obviously, there's always room and to play and to be more kind of freewheeling when I'm making work, obviously. But I have a very good sense before I even start making it when that work will be done, because it's such a defined composition in my head at the point I start to make it.
When did you decide on the titles?
My titles are like, especially for different series, are very potent parts of the work. They kind of tell their own story. And usually I title works once it's done. But I always am keeping a repository of words and phrases and things that I've read or seen that kind of spark my interest. Just a whole kind of amalgamation of just different things that I keep in my notes. And then when I start to want to title the work, I start to look through these notes I've kind of kept for years now and try to see what makes sense, what feeds into the visuality of the work. Even if it's not very obvious, it's a bit more ambiguous, I kind of pull from my own kind of writings and kind of just note taking.
Are you listening to music while you're working?
Sometimes. Not most of the time, though. Most of the time, I'm either watching things, different documentaries, or things that like I can kind of play in the background. I don't have to actually watch, but I can listen to. So obviously podcasts, and I think I spend most of my time in social media on YouTube, just listening to different videos, like whether they are like just trite, silly things or informative things about sciences, about the arts. I kind of have a very wide spectrum of things I listen to. But I find that unless the music kind of fades into the background, music for me like really makes me feel physically active. Like I want to dance, I want to do things. And like, unless there's something that kind of fades into the background, it kind of distracts me versus I actually fall asleep listening to podcasts. I don't know why listening to people's voices can be very calming to me, but it is.
Do you feel Black art can be defined?
No, I really don't. I feel like people want to define it and they want to put it in a box and say this is what it is, but it's just so vast and there's so many different experiences. It's like, does white art exist? Is it because the person's a Black person that made it and that makes it Black art? I mean, I think that's very reductive. So in a way, I don't think it actually exists. I think that we've made it exist because we put it into this kind of box of Black artists making art. And even if they're not making art about identity and so on and so forth, which I think majority of people are in a way, that is the way to kind of define Black art. I mean, I think it's much more easy to define art based on national borders, for example, which again, I'm not a huge fan of, but it's much more easy to define that than it is to define Black art. I mean, there are Black people everywhere all over the world making art. And I don't think that's a qualifier for whatever Black art has become. I think it's very reductive.
What materials do you use in your work?
I have always, the one material that I think everyone knows me for at this point is gold. I use that since the very big first work I ever made. What has changed a lot is now I'm working with sculpture. So I'm using bronze and marbles and very kind of primal stones and obviously woods, clays. So my sculptural kind of part of my practice has really taken root in the last probably 2 or 3 years. And I'm playing a lot of these different materials. With my actual work, I started to incorporate a lot more styles into the work. So I'm working with silks and different natural fibers, even silk cocoons. I mean, I started to really put a lot of different natural fibers into my works now. So it's a mixture of this kind of durability of gold with this more ephemeral kind of feeling of a fabric, kind of cross purposes with each other in a way. So yeah, I'm always expanding my materials list because I'm always interested in different kind of reliefs, different textures. The way that the eye plays on a canvas is very important to me. And I want to do that less through pictorial imagery, but rather through using materials to kind of create a story on the canvas. So materials are very important for me.
Share with us what your sculptures, how those are developing.
Of late, my newer works I'm making a lot of vessels, a lot of bronze pedestals. A lot of them are based upon more traditional West African kind of clay making and bronze making as well. But usually, the pedestals, whether you're talking about headrests or different, stools, royal stools or stools that are used every day, more ceremonial artifacts, I changed the materiality of them. I changed some of them to the form of them, but you can see the referencing basically. And I started to kind of compile the two together. For me, it seems very succinct that you have these kind of wooden pedestals, headrests that are used for a very particular purpose. And then you have vessels that are used for a very particular purpose in most West African traditions. And I've kind of brought them together. So I like to kind of play with the kind of structures and materials of these things and kind of reimagine them into different forms. So that's kind of, I guess, the newer body of works. And originally I was working a lot with, again, like I said, primal materials like obviously marbles, but also volcanic stone. I came across volcanic stone the first time I was in Mexico, and I was just enamored with just how primordial it looked. It looks like it came from the bowels, which it did, the bowels of the earth. It's like the black is so black. When you treat it, it can become very black. Obviously, it looks more gray when you first start to play with it. It's very porous. It feels like life is running through it. It feels very of another time. And so I started to want to play with that material. And then a place in Sicily, because obviously it's not a stone that's just found in Mexico. Obviously, you find it all over the world in different places. Sicily has a big repository of volcanic rock. And so I started to use that also because volcanic rock obviously is made from volcanic explosions and the cooling of lava. And so it kind of tracks back into this cosmic story that I feel is always the underlying thread in my work, and started making these sculptures called diviners. And if you think about like the South African Sangoma or the sightseers, people that are able to foretell futures or to see into the future, I kind of created these totemic sculptures with this volcanic stone that were meant to be kind of these seers, basically. And I think I made the first one for the Hayward show I did in 2022 in the Black Fantastic. And then since then, I've made 4 or 5 of these works with different stones, always these bronze orb-like heads that kind of reflect the viewer back at themselves. And so, yeah, I feel like my sculpture works can, again, exist in 2 different realms, where you'd have like the diviners being far more of a conceptual, experiential, totemic, sculptural experience. And then you have something that's driven far more from existing traditions and trying to, reimagine them. So again, even with the sculptural works, I think they're 2 different worlds they exist in.
Do you think about your audience while you're working?
I think about the space more than I think about the audience. For me, space is very important. The audience is important because I want to elicit a reaction. I'm not trying to control the reaction, but I do want to elicit the reaction, but I do that through space. And that's why I say I think about the space more than the audience, because inevitably we live in space, and each space we have creates different feelings in people. And you can enter a room and feel like your hairs on the back of your head stand up, or you can enter a room and feel completely calm. I'm usually trying to go for more the latter experience, where it's like a meditative experience. When you enter, you want to linger, you want to spend time. And I think the work and the space work in tandem to do that. And so for me, the first thing I think about when I start to make work, especially if I know where it's headed, is the space and how that work will live in the space. I think to me, that's more paramount in a way than even just the work itself. It's like, how is this work? And I think another artist that I remember reading about that was thought in the same way was Mark Rothko. And he was, very pedantic about how his paintings were hung in space, to the point of being highly mathematical about it. And I think to this day, they have to maintain those requests on his part to hang his work in a particular way, because both in tandem, the work and the space elicit a certain reaction. I'm not a person that likes to hang work, in white wall galleries. It's just not my interest, like, of course I can do it. It's fine. Kind of, you have to sometimes in you're doing exhibitions in different galleries or museums or places that you can't really alter. But generally, I like to create space around the work.
Are your life experiences reflected in your work?
I would say yes and no. I think that inevitably it is, just on a kind of subliminal level. Things I think about, places I've been. I think more than anything probably is the places I've been, things I've seen, different cultures I've been exposed to that kind of bleed into the work in not so obvious ways. But in actuality, I think that I live far more in the clouds than I live in reality. And so in that way, it's more just like my visions and my dreams or my ambitions. Like I think when I first started making artwork, I still kept this idea that I'd love to, be a space traveler. One of my favorite movies is Interstellar. I want to go to space. I want to go beyond our galaxy. I want to go beyond our solar system. I want to, travel and see other planets, and I still do. I don't think that impulse is as strong because I kind of have a greater sense of mortality now than I did when I was younger. But still, like that kind of thing weaves into my work, like my complete awe, the universe we live in, the earth we live on, trying to imbue works with that kind of mysticism and awe and letting people feel that, the vastness of things. I think our culture in many ways is probably the culture that thinks least about the vastness of our existence because we very much focus on the mundane. And I think that the majority of older cultures, ancient cultures, and this is probably across, a lot of different regions of the world, spent a lot of time pondering their place in the universe. And that's something that I think definitely funnels into my work a lot, is these kind of larger ideas. But if it's not that, then it's, things I want to learn about, things I want to immerse myself into. So I'm not saying, I don't think I draw from my historical experiences. I think I'm drawing from future experiences in some ways.
What are you excited about right now?
There's a lot I'm excited about, but unfortunately I can't talk about. It's unfortunate because everything is timed and so sensitive, but there are a lot of different projects I'm working on. I'm really excited for this year, next year. There's a very big project I'm working on for the spring of next year that I hope I'll be able to announce in the summer of 2025, if everything works out as planned. And other than that, I mean, obviously I have shows coming up. I have a show, Style 94, opening in February, a small show, kind of a show that's going to show existing works that haven't been shown in the States. And then obviously a larger show will come in the near future. And then I have a group show with Jeffrey Deitch, the Future Abstract, which I hope will happen on time, given everything that's going on in LA right now. But fingers crossed that things work out the way they need to around that. So there are definitely, interesting shows I'm happy to be showing with other artists in, and kind of my work's evolving into different places and with the new directions I've been kind of exploring in the last 2 years or so. But the big things I unfortunately can't divulge as of yet.
What do you feel is the purpose of art?
The purpose of art, I think, is to allow people to see beyond the mundane of life, right? It's like allowing people to see things in different ways, experience. I think so much of the art that touches me, and even, paintings, it can do that as well. It's very experiential. It changes your perspective. It makes you question. Like I guess maybe because I'm an artist, when I look at work, I always, with that kind of inspires me. I'm always like, how was that made? So it's a dual kind of thing. It's like literally, how is that made? How did that person create this kind of visual kind of game that you're looking at, if it's complex or not? And then secondly, what doors is it opening in my mind? Because really, after you finish the work in the studio and you have your own relationship with your work and you put your own kind of energy into the work, and it gives something back to you as well. But then ultimately it goes into the world and it belongs to the world. And I don't mean in a legal sense, because, there are a lot of issues with that with artists, but I mean in the spiritual sense. Like, now this no longer is my object, only existing in my space, and I'm interacting with it. Now the world's interacting with it. And it's really important that people can have these like small or even seismic shifts when they see something that moves them. I think art should also inspire people. It should inspire people to want to, even if it inspires them to want to make, inspires them to want to create. That's a beautiful thing. I mean, creation is what we're here to do. But inevitably, I think it's meant to shift perspective. It's meant to allow people to open up, in a way, their third eye. Because I think that's what artists, in a way, are using when they are creating, from their mind's eye onto a canvas, onto a sculpture, onto whatever it is that they're making. They're making something out of nothing. That is pure creation in many ways. When it goes out into the world, if people can be equally inspired, draw what they are supposed to take from it, see how it speaks to them in their life in a very idiosyncratic way, and they are then propelled to do something or be something or go somewhere, all the plethora of things that something can inspire you to do. That, to me, is the purpose of a powerful piece of art.
I've enjoyed this conversation very much, and this is our last question. So, as an artist, How do you want your work to impact society? How do you want your work to have an effect upon people in society?
I think it's kind of very drawn to what I was saying before. I mean, the feedback, which is so, you're in your own mind, and all the time you don't even know if you're making people are gonna care, if it's gonna do anything, if it's going to be even something that people even take a second look at. There's so much art in the world, and I even go to spaces, and if something doesn't grab my attention, I just walk past it. Something has to grab my attention for me to want, or I'm going there for that particular purpose, obviously. But if I'm looking at something blindly, I don't know what I'm expecting to see, and I go to a museum or something, and I'm not looking at every single piece of work. I'm just looking at the works that attract my attention. I think inevitably, I want people to be, when they stand in front of my work and they experience the work in the space it's in, everything else, I want them to feel ennobled, inspired, like I can go out and do anything I can dream of, and to be inspired, to have the breath of God kind of placed in you. And, that's what inspire is, right? To be inspired, to have the breath of something, otherworldly come inside of you and shift your viewpoint of something. That is, I think, the ultimate goal for me with the work. And obviously, I would love it to live on and have a place in history, obviously, or have a place in the art world, for traditional art world canon and all of these things. I mean, that's more of the, I guess, egoistic drive of, that I think artists have. But in essence, it's about how people feel and how it makes people feel. And if it can inspire people, and if it can make people see things differently, and also want to contribute to society in their own way that they can. I think that's my main goal with making work.
Well, thank you for your contribution. Your work is lovely, and art will save us. So thank you.
Thank you. I agree. And thank you very much for asking me to participate in your amazing podcast.
Thank you for listening to Cerebral Women Art Talks podcast. For additional content, please visit cerebralwomen.com and be sure to follow Cerebral Women on Instagram.